because of all these narratives that are going crazy online about when I told my mom I wasn't going to play the game. 4:47, you guys found out at 5:20. So one of the most important people in my life found out 40 minutes before you guys.
There is a terrifying, defining breaking point for every single transcendent athlete in the history of professional sports. It is that microscopic, razor-thin moment when they realize they are no longer just playing a game of basketball. They realize they are fighting an exhausting, deeply toxic, multi-front war. They are fighting the opposing defense. They are fighting the officials. And most dangerously, they are fighting a lying, fabricated media establishment desperate to manufacture controversy out of thin air. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are not just looking at a box score. We are completely ripping the doors off the hinges to document the most ruthless, vindicating, and aggressive performance of Caitlin Clark's professional career. This wasn't just a basketball game. This was psychological warfare. To understand the absolute massacre that occurred on Friday night, ending in a brutal 90-82 victory for the Indiana Fever, you have to understand the crucible of lies that Caitlin Clark was forced to endure in the 72 hours leading up to tip-off. The mainstream sports media had spent an entire week peddling an incredibly malicious, entirely fabricated narrative regarding a so-called injury cover-up. The rumor mill was churning, generating millions of clicks off the false suggestion that the Fever organization and Clark herself were hiding a serious back issue, manipulating the timeline, and deceiving the public. It was exhausting. It was petty, and it was a complete lie. The day before the game, Clark walked into the press conference room, sat at the podium, and completely obliterated the media establishment. She looked directly into the lenses of the cameras and systematically dismantled the timeline. She laid out the cold mathematical facts. She notified her mother at 4:47. The media found out at 5:20. A ruthless, indisputable 40-minute window that proved the narrative was mathematically absurd. She was furious. She was unapologetic, and she was holding on to a pure, cinematic rage that she was about to unleash on the hardwood. But the Golden State Valkyries did not care about Caitlin Clark's media grievances. They came into Indianapolis with one objective: absolute physical destruction. Enter head coach Natalie Nakase. Nakase is not just a coach. She's an architect of chaos. She is widely considered one of the smartest, most analytical, and deeply methodical defensive minds in the entire WNBA. With an extensive resume that includes high-level strategy sessions with the Golden State Warriors, Nakase does not just watch film. She dissects it at a molecular level. Nakase had been meticulously studying Clark's game tape since her historic, record-shattering run at the University of Iowa. She knew the exact biomechanics of the left step-back jumper. She knew the precise square footage range of the logo three-pointer. She knew about Clark's brilliant, subtle hesitation move that freezes defenders just long enough to create a millimeter of space for the pull-up. Nakase knew it all, and she designed a highly specific, utterly suffocating defensive scheme, entirely predicated on sanctioned physical assault. The goal was explicit: take those specific shots away, disrupt her rhythm, and make Caitlin Clark deeply, psychologically uncomfortable. And for the first 2 quarters of this game, let's be brutally honest, the blueprint was working flawlessly. The first half was an absolute physical war. The box score simply gives you the numbers, but the actual game film reveals a completely unhinged street brawl. The Valkyries threw multiple bodies at Clark the second she crossed half court. They deployed constant disruption, utilizing relentless physicality at every single catch, every single screen, every single cut to the basket. Nakase's defensive scheme created real, legitimate, terrifying problems for the Indiana Fever ecosystem. The sheer physicality disrupted the timing of their offensive sets. The multiple, rotating defenders made it nearly impossible for Clark to secure comfortable catches. The offense was stalling. The crowd was growing anxious. The tension in Gainbridge Fieldhouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. But if the Golden State Valkyries, and if Natalie Nakase, truly thought this level of sanctioned bullying was going to make Caitlin Clark shrink into the shadows, they completely, fatally miscalculated her psychological makeup. Because you do not break a generational genius with cheap shots. You simply awaken an absolute monster. The ignition point arrived right before the halftime break. The tension that had been building for 20 grueling minutes finally, violently snapped. Clark put her head down and drove violently into the teeth of the Valkyries' defense. The ball was jarred loose, ending up in the arms of Valkyries forward Janelle Salon. But the play wasn't dead in Clark's mind. She aggressively swatted at the loose ball, making heavy, undeniable contact. Salon took immediate, explosive exception to the extra physicality. She stepped directly, physically, into Clark's face. Suddenly, it wasn't a basketball game anymore. It was a heavyweight prize fight. The two of them started jawing relentlessly at each other, trading vicious verbal blows. The temperature in the arena skyrocketed. The benches on both sides started creeping dangerously close toward the hardwood. Fever guard Veronica Burton had to literally, physically step in and wedge herself between the combatants to separate them before punches were thrown. The officials rushed in, immediately handing out double technical fouls, one for Clark, one for Salon. Both teams went to the locker room at halftime with the air completely sucked out of the arena. They were holding the tension of a game that was about to violently explode. But nobody in the mainstream media, none of the talking heads, are discussing what that specific double technical actually meant for the trajectory of the second half. Let me explain the terrifying psychology of an apex generational competitor. Caitlin Clark is not a player who arbitrarily picks petty fights. She does not initiate meaningless physical confrontations for the cameras. She absorbs the contact, she internalizes the disrespect, and she weaponizes it. That specific altercation with Janelle Salon perfectly combined with the exhausting, infuriating week she had just endured regarding the back injury narrative. It created an absolute perfect storm of competitive, unadulterated anger. When Caitlin Clark emerged from that tunnel for the third quarter, she had completely gone to the dark side of the force. The game was tied at 48. The home crowd was desperate for a spark, and Caitlin Clark was ready to burn the entire stadium down. She brought the basketball up the court. No urgency in her step, completely calm, ice in her veins. She walked directly to the logo, 33 feet away from the basket, a different zip code, a different stratosphere. And with the entire defensive scheme locked onto her, with the entire arena holding its collective breath, she pulled up. She swished it flawlessly. It was the most disrespectful, devastating shot of the season. But what she did next was the true cinematic masterpiece. She did not just jog quietly back on defense. She didn't celebrate with her teammates. She turned directly, intentionally, to Valkyries veteran guard Tiffany Hayes. She stepped right into her personal space, and she talked absolute, unfiltered trash. This wasn't aggressive or malicious. It was the exact terrifying way that apex competitors who respect each other talk trash in the middle of a war that actually matters. Clark said something cold-blooded, Hayes said something back, and Gainbridge Fieldhouse went absolutely, undeniably electric. It was an on-court exorcism. She was physically, visibly expelling all the frustration from the media lies, all the anger from the Valkyries' defensive hacking, and channeling every single ounce of that toxic energy into utterly destroying the scheme standing in front of her. That specific moment, the 33-foot logo 3 followed by the cold-blooded trash talk, is exactly who Caitlin Clark actually is. She is not the player who gets pulled with 7 minutes to go in a decided game. She is not the player whose injury timeline gets twisted and manipulated by local beat reporters hunting for engagement. She is the superstar who takes a week of absolute garbage, hits a shot from the parking lot, talks trash to a seasoned WNBA all-star, and completely takes over the basketball game. Once Clark hit that impossible shot from the logo, Natalie Nakase's entire meticulous defensive scheme was shattered into a million pieces. The Valkyries were forced to desperately adjust their spacing. They had to step out further. They had to commit 2 bodies higher up the floor. And the exact second the defensive scheme adjusted, the geometry of the court changed. The passing lanes ripped wide open, and the transition assists started flowing like a tidal wave. Clark finished the night with an absolute masterpiece of a stat line. 22 points, 9 highly efficient, defense-shredding assists, 4 made three-pointers on 9 attempts. She played 32 grueling, punishing minutes. The Valkyries' game plan completely broke down in the second half, because Clark is simply too offensively brilliant for any scheme to contain. For a full 40 minutes without the defensive, players paying a physical price that becomes completely unsustainable. But the true genius of Caitlin Clark isn't just her scoring. It's what her gravity does to the rest of the floor. When Clark operates with this level of ruthless, ball-dominant efficiency, the entire ecosystem of the Indiana Fever completely thrives. And the ultimate beneficiary of this geometric breakdown was none other than Aliyah Boston. Because the Valkyries were so terrified of Clark's shooting range, Aliyah Boston unlocked the absolute best version of herself. Boston delivered what was arguably the quietest, most devastatingly dominant 16-rebound performance in the history of the franchise. She completely owned the painted area, bullying the Golden State frontcourt and scoring 20 points on an incredibly efficient 8 of 15 shooting. When Clark is orchestrating the transition game, manipulating the defense with her eyes, and hitting Boston in perfect stride, this Indiana Fever team transcends being just a playoff contender. They become a terrifying, absolute championship-caliber threat. But to establish absolute credibility in this analysis, you do not just have to take our word for it. You have to listen to the opposition. You have to look at the wreckage left behind. Following the final buzzer, with the scoreboard reading 90-82 in favor of the Fever, Natalie Nakase sat down at the podium. Nakase is brilliant. She is a basketball purist. She studies the tape, and she was brutally, refreshingly honest about what she had just witnessed. Nakase publicly acknowledged the terrifying truth that the rest of the league is slowly waking up to. She admitted that Clark simply made the impossible adjustments. Clark found the microscopic, fleeting spaces that the defensive scheme left open for just fractions of a second. She made the precise, laser-guided passes that the Valkyries were completely unprepared to defend. Because, as Nakase realized in real time, you can drill your players to prepare for the left step back. You can run defensive rotations to prepare for the logo 3. But you absolutely, fundamentally, cannot prepare for a basketball savant who diagnoses your defensive weakness in real time and surgically, ruthlessly exploits it. That is the ultimate, undeniable hallmark of an elite generational player. She does not just execute her own skill set. She actively hunts for the fatal flaw in yours, and she completely breaks it. The Indiana Fever are officially 4-2 on the season. Caitlin Clark is completely, undeniably healthy, burying the fabricated media narratives in the dirt. Aliyah Boston just had her absolute best game of the season. The momentum in Indianapolis is absolutely undeniable. This is the version of Caitlin Clark that the entire league, from the front offices to the defensive specialists, is completely terrified of. Not the load-managed version, not the highly protected 23-minute rookie version. They are terrified of the angry, completely focused, trash-talking, logo 3-hitting, team-carrying version. That is the apex predator who is going to lead the Indiana Fever through this incredibly toxic, highly scrutinized season. And on Friday night, against a brilliant defensive mind and a team ready for a street brawl, Caitlin Clark reminded every single executive, every single reporter, and every single defensive specialist exactly who she is. This is the new era of the WNBA. The physical toll is immense, the media scrutiny is suffocating, but the talent is absolutely unstoppable. Smash that subscribe button right now if you want the absolutely fearless, high-octane analysis that tells the actual, unvarnished stories behind the box score. We don't just read the stats. We break down the warfare. Drop your most explosive, unfiltered take on this game in the comments below. Did the media cross the line? Was the double technical justified? Let us know. Hit the notification bell because this Fever team is just getting started. The momentum is completely shifting, and we are going to be right here, documenting every single piece of the wreckage. We will see you in the next video.